All right, welcome to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. Today, we're going to have a couple of organizers from United in Struggle, which is an organization based in Canada, based in Vancouver, over on the western side of Canada. And in particular, we're going to be talking to um, talking a little bit about some repression that they faced and how they're trying to navigate that in a principled manner. United in Struggle is a revolutionary mass organization in Vancouver dedicated to uniting the working class, Indigenous peoples, and all oppressed to fight back against the ruling class. And so we'll also talk a little bit more about some of the organizing that they have done over the last few years, which I'm excited to learn about a little bit too. But the incident that kind of led to us, having this discussion is that on October 28th, members of United in Struggle spoke at the All Out Palestine Rally in Vancouver, where they firmly upheld the principle, the right of the Palestinian right to resist, and called on revolutionaries everywhere to take up struggle against our shared imperialist enemy. One of the speakers, Natalie Knight, who is having some technical difficulties, but hopefully we can sort those out, is now facing potential firing from her job at Langara, I think that's correct, college, they'll correct me if I'm wrong, as a result of major pressure from pro-Zionist forces, pro-Zionist organizations. Um, and this is the case, obviously, of so many folks across Canada, the US, and Europe who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. And so we're going to have a conversation today. I think it's important that we talk about these kinds of repression, talk about how folks are trying to respond to them, and do so in a principled way that doesn't make, the repression that folks are facing here seem equivalent or as terrible, obviously, as the actual genocide that's unfolding in Gaza, right? Focus on having an analysis of what's going on here connected to what's going on over there, but also, upholding that we need to stay principled about that. And so to give folks some context of this, because it's not something that's in the US media, but obviously it is something that, is being shared around in media in Canada. I want to play folks the actual speech. It's like 6 minutes long. There's a couple of folks who participate just so folks can see what Natalie Knight has faced disciplinary action for before we get into the conversation.
From Unity and Struggle, and they're going to be talking about this from an internationalist perspective, so please, again, give them a warm welcome.
I am moved by our speakers here today. I am moved by the speaker we just heard. I am moved by all of your presence here today. My name is Natalie Knight. This is Billy Greer. We are members of a revolutionary mass organization in East Vancouver called United in Struggle. We unite workers, Indigenous people, and all oppressed people to fight back against the ruling elites. 2 years ago in September of 2021, 6 political prisoners dug their escape out of a maximum security prison using only spoons. Amazing. This was a feat of determination and ingenuity, only eclipsed by the amazing, brilliant offensive waged on October 7th. United in Struggle upholds the unqualified right to resist and fight back against imperialist aggression, colonialism, and genocidal campaigns of the Israeli state. The Israeli state works as a regional enforcer in the Middle East on behalf of the United States, but not just on behalf of the United States. Canada is in there too, and all countries that group themselves around this erratic and waning empire. The mainstream media can't be called out enough. The mainstream media portrays this as an ethnic conflict. between Israeli elites and all Palestinians. This is a war between imperialists and all oppressed and exploited people around the world, inside and outside of Gaza. It is a war that Israel is prepared to wage against its own people as it arms its citizen militia with automatic weapons in an attempt to quell unrest within its own borders. In the face of the Zionist enemy that fires bombs down indiscriminately on the families and children within Gaza, Palestinian freedom fighters make their own weather. They make their own weather. They become the wind and the rain that will smother the fire of the enemy. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world express outrage in the streets because we are moved by the fierce bravery and vision for liberation and the right to return. That clarity of vision can revive all of our fighting spirits. All of our fighting spirits, including the working class and Indigenous nations and people here who are being railroaded into reconciliation, being railroaded into fighting over pieces of the pie and forgetting about the world that we can win together.
Well, the rallies and solidarity actions across the world truly have been moving. The October 7th offensive of the Palestinian resistance set off sirens. They are a wake-up call to revolutionaries in this country. Yeah! Over and over again, we wait for the next wave of bombing in Gaza or the next wave of violence in the West Bank before we mobilize and take to the streets. And that's never enough. We need to begin to build the revolutionary movement which can overthrow this rotten system that fucking exploits us at home and wages war on our Palestinian brothers and sisters across the world. The struggle in Palestine is more advanced than ours, but that doesn't mean we sit back and we wait for the Israeli counteroffensive or even for the victory of the resistance. We need to take inspiration from our Palestinian comrades to organize the masses of working people in Canada to overthrow the fucking imperialist scum. The truest expression of our support for the revolutionary struggle in Palestine will come through waging revolutionary struggle in Canada and overthrowing the imperialists, the ghouls in Parliament, and their corporate backers who dominate the world and create misery and suffering wherever they get their blood-sucking tentacles. We fight to build a multinational socialist society, a new state for the working class, uniting Indigenous people and the multinational working class in Canada, which can and will play an active role in promoting and supporting all anti-imperialist and socialist struggles around the world. The enemy that we're up against in our fight is the same one funneling money and weapons to the murderous soldiers in the Israeli military. The fearless struggle of the Palestinian resistance is and will continue to be a North Star for all revolutionaries and all oppressed and exploited people in the world. And Palestine will be free from the river to the sea.
Long live the Intifada!
Long live the Intifada!
Long live proletarian internationalism!
Long live proletarian internationalism!
All right. So that gives folks the context of the actual speech in question that caused so much commotion. And so I will welcome to the stage now Zach, who is a member of United in Struggle. and hopefully we'll be able to get Natalie in here. She's having an issue where the service we use to stream keeps bouncing her after a few seconds, and so I apologize for that. We're trying to work it out as we go on the fly, but we do want to get into some of the discussion, and hopefully she can join us, and I'm sure Zach can share a lot of the context too. So Zach, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and very hopefully Natalie.
Yes, hopefully so. We'll keep trying to figure that out. So could you just start by sharing a little bit of what the response to the video, or well, to the speech, right, was what Natalie has faced in terms of consequences, and to what you can tell, what within this speech seemed to be provoking that response?
Well, when Natalie first gave the speech, what started going around on social media, kind of right-wing pro-Israeli sources, it wasn't like, the speech in its totality. It was basically that one line where, she calls it a brilliant offensive, and completely taken out of context, which is, par for the course with these kind of slanderous campaigns, and went through the media cycle, and that's really what people focused on. It was, oh, this is a celebration of violence. This is a celebration of Hamas and everything that kind of conjures up in this cultural unconscious, where it's like, if the line that's coming out of kind of Israeli propaganda right now is that Hamas equals ISIS, then I don't know what could be a more like damning thing to say than to say that, like, oh, we love this. This is, it's a, the celebration of just pure nihilistic violence for its own sake, which, if even a bad faith reader, if you saw the entire speech, that's clearly not what is going on. But it doesn't take very long for social media outrage to make the jump to mass media, and local politicians, local people in real positions of power deciding to publicly opine on what some English instructor from a local community college had to say.
Right on. Yeah. So say that, like, let's get to that piece a little bit. So she's an English instructor. She's a lecturer, right? So she's probably like, I don't remember the term that you have in Canada for that, but it's sort of like an adjunct instructor, I guess, in our context, right?
Sort of what this position she's in, though. But like, yeah, she's not, a tenured faculty by any stretch.
Right. And these are often the folks, especially in the academic settings, that I mean, there have been some, attacks on a few tenured professors in the US context. But often it is folks that don't have tenure, or are like kind of on yearly contracts or semester by semester contracts for their labor within the university. So I know Zach's going to try to see if we can get Natalie in, maybe via phone, since she's just not able to connect to through the internet right now. But that's the context, right? And then she's been, as far as I understand it at this point, she's been placed on leave, and is pending, I guess, an investigation or a determination of her status. So yeah, if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So right now, I think Natalie would be much better equipped to kind of speak to that, but it's kind of been playing a waiting game where, there was like the immediate backlash response that started coming in. We had different kind of pro-Zionist groups locally who were kind of calling for her to be removed. We had, weren't certain at like in that moment what that actually was going to look like on Langara's end. And then within a day or so, she was put on leave, and it was kind of like in limbo at that point. And I know that Natalie has kind of gone back and forth with her union representatives over, what the terms of, the leave are, what, like what she can do on her end, what we can do as an organization, like to provide principled defense. I'm sorry. I'm trying to. Natalie, can you hear? No, sorry. We keep trying to make the signal call work, but it keeps kicking us out. Yeah, so the kind of the situation there has been one where, so I'm going to just try one last thing if we can.
Sure. Yeah, just take your time.
Just call her directly.
I'd make a joke. Daruba bin Wahad at this point would say, like, the CIA is messing up our signal here. But
oh, it's all CSIS up here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, except at McGill University, right?
Oh, well, they're its own special kind of hell.
So let's continue on a little bit, and then we can kind of come back, and hopefully Natalie will be able to join us at one point. Yeah. So could you just say a little bit about what has the organizing climate been like, and state repression, and in repression in this instance is often, as we see in the United States, it's multi-pronged. Like, it's not just the state, it's these Zionist organizations very often. Sometimes it's individual Zionist actors.
Sure.
And then obviously it's institutions. And so, I'm interested in like what organizing has been like in Vancouver, like some of the stuff that's going on in your area related to this, and what that climate of repression has been like.
Yeah. I think we might have Natalie. Can you hear?
Wow. It must be something with her tech. Yeah.
Yeah. This is getting really ridiculous. Sorry, the state of repression. We just connected that worked for a couple of seconds. I'm not going to do it. Sorry. Here we go. Natalie, can you hear me? Natalie? Sorry, Jake, can you repeat the question one more time? It's just,
Actually, let's back up a little bit before we get into that question. So I think one of the things that's interesting to think about, right, is, I mean, obviously you talked about what got clipped out, right, and what gets framed in a certain way. Right. But I think what's interesting about that speech, right, and it's also kind of upheld within the petition that is out there for Natalie, and we should get that I should get that into the show notes or the comments at some point in this discussion. But is that one of the things that Natalie is upheld is that what she says is has a basis in international law and has
Mhm.
and that these are legitimate rights of Palestinians to resist their oppression, right? And I think that this is something that, in particular, the media is very wary of allowing it to enter into the conversation at all, right? It's one thing to talk about Palestinians dying en masse
Yeah.
because of what, Israel and even our bombs in the US, and, Canada supports it as well, right? Because of what our governments are supporting there. Um, and obviously they don't necessarily want us to talk about that, but they will allow some of that discussion because they can't really do much they haven't figured out a way to. I mean, there is one version that I've seen, which is if you use the word martyrs, then they will say you're glorifying terrorism as well.
Yeah.
But other than that, usually they're allowing these expressions of mourning, but they are not allowing for people to say what Natalie articulated, which is that Palestinians have a right to resist, and that we're seeing the most advanced resistance that we have seen from out of Palestinian struggle in decades, right? And
Mhm.
that these represent advances in terms of their ability to resist their oppression, right? And I think
Absolutely.
that, she articulates that very well in that piece. And obviously, institutions don't like that. And like you said, they equate, because of the kind of boogeyman that they can conjure, uh, surrounded by what people think about Hamas. Um, and the fact that Hamas is equated with as a terrorist organization, as are basically every faction of
Really?
the Palestinian resistance. Um, that this is the tactic that is getting used, and I guess one of the things that one of the reasons why we wanted to have Natalie, and unfortunately she's not with us yet, but is to just say that I'm interested in how you all are thinking about that in this. And I know Natalie has sought to kind of uphold that, as far as I understand, as a
Mhm.
principle throughout her own repression, which is, obviously poses challenges, because that's not something that institutions want to grant, essentially, that, we can say Palestinians have a right to resist.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing that, like, as you're saying, that does seem to be some leeway given for mourning, um, you know, whatever in whatever very very narrow confines or that's allowable. But and this is something you see like time and again throughout kind of the history of anti-colonial movements. The way that they're viewed in like in imperialist centers, at the point where some acceptance of legitimacy of like grievances kind of starts to come about, there's this liberal notion where it's like, well, if they are the perfect victim, then we can feel bad about it. And I think that that's one of the most kind of remarkable things about Palestinian resistance, going back, to even before the Nakba, is that Palestinians have never been, perfect victims. There's always been resistance. There has always been a clinging to the right to return, a refusal to just kind of accept their dispossession and murder as a fait accompli. Um, and, with the most recent offensive with Al Aqsa flood, you saw a lot of people point out, I think very rightly, that, um, whatever we want to say about the state of Israeli military capacity, their intelligence or whatever, they they were they took a serious blow. Like, Israel's nose was bloodied in a way that it hasn't been in a long time. And I think that that freaked them out. They didn't know what to do with that. And I don't think that the Western imperialist countries like the US or Canada or, Germany, that's a whole other kind of shitstorm over there. But
Right.
They don't know how to compute that almost. It's like that the fact that Palestinians are able to fight back to overcome such astonishing levels of surveillance and repression in Gaza. I know that's something that Natalie has talked about in the past as well. That when we're talking about Gaza, we're talking about the most advanced situation of we're talking about maybe Natalie, can you hear me, Natalie? No, sorry. This is definitely getting farcical at this point. We're talking about levels of repression and surveillance that are almost unimaginable. Where this is Gaza is a place where the Israeli occupation authorities, they count calories, the calories that are literally getting into the territory to ensure that the maximum repression happens without absolute mass starvation that at an uncontrollable level. And so the sheer fact that Palestinian resistance fighters were able to cut through this digital dragnet and fly gliders into firmly Israeli held territory and strategically attack targets, military and paramilitary targets, is incredible and brilliant, as Natalie said. And I think that in the imperialist centers like that we are, when we ask what does real anti-imperialism look like, is it is it mourning and feeling sad because Palestinians or any colonized nations are being slowly ground down, and maybe we go and have a vigil every so often, and maybe there's a mass rally every so often when it gets really bad? Or are we willing to say there is a right to resist, and it goes we firmly root it in our political principles, but we can point beyond that to say even the United Nations, which is supposedly the guarantor of the imperialist-led world system that we find ourselves in, even the United Nations has codified this right to resist, and even they, when push goes to shove, can't deny that this is legitimate. And so what they're always going to do is try to find other ways to delegitimize it. And that's where you get the atrocity propaganda. That's where you get just the bald-faced lies about Hamas has, secret bunkers below this or that hospital. Oh no, we didn't actually bomb it. Oh no, like, wait, I guess we did, but they had military installations underneath it, so it was fine. And then when they're actually forced to give some, evidence, there's a table rolled out with a half dozen AKs and a couple laptops. It's absurd. And like, nobody should believe it because it's all bullshit. But, there's vested interest in believing it. So the New York Times is still going to dutifully report on what the IDF said about this or that. And, the Biden administration is still going to say, well, we don't have a red line on what's too far for the IDF to do. And Justin Trudeau is still going to do the even more pathetic version of what Biden is saying, because that's what he does. And so, yeah, it comes down to, I think, first and foremost, it's political principle. But then second, and I think that this kind of goes back to how, we strategically navigate, the legal context of repression, lower levels of repression, obviously, but repression nonetheless. At home, it's like, well, we can still point to, in this case, international law, and I think it helps to legitimize, the battle to legitimize the Palestinian resistance amongst people who might not be quite there yet, but we need to get on side. And also, there is an extent to which it helps protect us as well. Imperfectly, obviously, but
Of course.
yeah, some buffer.
Yeah. So I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit about like your organization and some of the stuff that you've been a part of before this, right? To give our audience a little bit of context as to who you all are.
Sure.
I think that, there's obviously, and I think this also connects in, right? Because like, obviously Canada is a settler colonial context, the US is, and so is Israel. And, in all of these contexts, what is not, what is kind of in the United States, obviously, Black resistance is firmly not allowed as well, but Indigenous resistance either. And I guess that's true in Canada too, in both cases. But so yeah, it would be interesting, I think, for our audience to hear a little bit of the activities that you all have been a part of and kind of how you've formed and developed as an organization.
Sure. Yeah. The kind of the first roots of United in Struggle, I would say, we have people, we have members, across the age range, in our core group of organizers. We have people who got politicized in the 80s around the anti-apartheid movement in solidarity with, the liberation struggle in South Africa. And we have, younger members who are, late teens, early 20s, who have been politicized like in the last few years. But the kind of the real roots of the organization, I'd say, in a lot of ways come out of the experience of the Wet'suwet'en solidarity blockades in early 2020, which, talking to American comrades, there seems to be some knowledge about it, but this, like, I don't want to overstate it, but it did feel in a lot of ways, because obviously 2020 was a real flashpoint year politically,
it kind of felt like our, maybe smaller experience of the Floyd rebellions that, kind of swept American cities. For context.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just tell folks a little bit about what it is, because I don't think we should assume too much
Oh, yeah. No,
people's
yeah.
knowledge. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So for context, the Wet'suwet'en Nation in kind of central British Columbia, the province that we're in, has been facing for quite a few years now a construction project to build oil and gas pipelines through their territory. And it's been a long kind of, running experience of land defenders holding territory against this project, kind of facing down multi-billion-dollar, energy corporation in conjunction with the province of BC, in conjunction with the federal government, an entire wing, kind of, political surveillance paramilitary wing of the RCMP was essentially created for the express purpose of responding to Wet'suwet'en and other similar political movements. So like this it's a real kind of flashpoint, and it kind of goes to the heart of Canada's capitalist and very colonial economy on the basis of resource extraction as a huge part of the Canadian economy. And so at the beginning of 2020, there was an RCMP paramilitary raid on an encampment of land defenders in the Wet'suwet'en territory, which sparked a kind of coast to coast, because there was actually a number of actions up even in Nunavut, in the Arctic Circle, of rail and port and major major road highway blockades that for a few weeks really felt like they were grinding down the Canadian economy, which, again, has so much focused on the transportation of raw materials and natural resources. And so that was a real kind of flashpoint. And I think for a lot of people who are now in the UIS, they were, including Natalie, they were kind of at the front lines of organizing the solidarity blockades in Vancouver, which shut down the Port of Vancouver for a number of days, essentially. But it didn't take long after that for COVID to hit, and this happens and that happens, and all of a sudden the energy dissipates. And so there was a real kind of what now moment, I think, that a lot of people felt. And so a number of people kind of got together to do an extended month-long debrief of the experience and begin to do political study, kind of really looking at what happened, what happened in this experience. Was it was it just a matter of we have to wait for the next version of this kind of upsurge, or is there something politically we should be doing differently in the meantime? And so I think that the big lesson that was, there was a couple lessons learned. One was about the limits of kind of spontaneous struggle and, waiting for kind of the masses to move and then to kind of just, try to jump into that. There's a need for like real long-term revolutionary organizations that can do this solid work, and then provide leadership in the meantime and be in a position to provide leadership when mass movements are erupting. And kind of as at another level, start to think a little more critically about how we conceptualize, anti-colonial politics in a country like Canada, because, for very good reasons, there is a focus on the land question, on, territorial autonomy and sovereignty, on the just resolution of land claims, of land back as as a political slogan and a kind of a rallying cry, and obviously these are all essential ingredients, but if we look at a city like Vancouver, where there are a lot of poor and working class Indigenous people here who aren't from these territories, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations that are not from these territories to begin with, then you got to ask, like, well, what is, sorry, my cat is going crazy right now. What is a politics that is adequate to their needs and to their political demands? And so, all these kind of elements starting to churn together. And, it may sound like there's a lot of, it's all negative takeaways, but I think one big positive takeaway as well was about seeing the potentials for a mass movement that was in solidarity with Indigenous national liberation struggles, and trying to investigate what would be the basis of deepening that solidarity be. And I think that, like, where we've come to is, revolutionary class politics, revolutionary working class politics has to be the foundation that builds that alliance, and that makes it possible to imagine what, not only what, like, a class struggle that leads to liberation for the working class would be, in the form of socialism, working class democracy. But, hand in hand with that, of what Indigenous liberation looks like in a country like Canada. Indigenous people make up about 5% of the total population. And, rightly or wrongly, that's not, enough people to overthrow an imperialist state. We need each other. We need this powerful alliance in order to, like, Natalie says in the speech, it's like, so that we're not just fighting over pieces of the pie, so that we can return to a real vision of the world that we can fight for and win together.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think that, these are similar, I think, issues that we still have. I mean, groups, groups are trying to grapple with it. I don't want to diminish that people aren't
Mhm.
thinking about these things in the United States context, but like, yeah, how do we weave together Black liberation, Indigenous liberation and sovereignty, and our socialists, vision that a lot of us as white settlers on the land, have, and figure out a way that we can be in solidarity with each other, and not diminish each other's horizons or goals, but
Mhm.
also not also not just look for like the lowest common denominator either, of like, oh yeah, we can all agree on, $15 an hour is a good minimum wage, or whatever, the thing is, which it's
Right.
not a
Yeah.
good minimum wage, but
No.
um but so yeah, I appreciate y'all for doing that kind of social investigation, and for trying to build an organization that's primed to grapple with those. um Justin had a couple of good comments. One was that obviously with the Wet'suwet'en blockades, that this is also happening in the context of reconciliation, which is
Truth and
this
reconciliation.
yeah,
Favorite
this state
buzzword.
yeah. So it's this, this is for folks who aren't too familiar. It's this state-led Canadian project, which you know give some, I guess, voice to the idea of being, it's kind of like a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, I guess I would say.
For the
It's
whole
like,
country, yeah, essentially,
yeah,
yeah, it's the next stage in a long process of essentially the Canadian state attempting to use assimilation practices to extinguish Indigenous nations, land and territorial claims there, and kind of to legalize them out of existence, essentially.
hmm
You know, and it's sad to say that in some respects they're doing a good job of it. You know, there are certain nations that some like there's growing class fractions of small indigenous capitalist class fractions that are being integrated into the overall ruling class project, and it's it's a really tricky situation about how to kind of navigate those national and class dimensions. Still, like you said, it requiring a lot of social investigation, which, yeah, social investigation, I think, is kind of also central to how we've conceptualized our political work and our project.
right on. Yeah, and Joshua, thanks for shouting out. For folks who want to check out more, Red Nation podcast has done several episodes related to these projects that we can, meaning the blockades, but also reconciliation in a Canadian context. So people who want to check out more in detail on those conversations, head over there. And so let's get back though a little bit to the current context, and so I know you can't totally speak for Natalie, and that puts you in a little bit of an awkward position here, but just to your understanding, how is she trying to navigate this moment, knowing what she's facing, and to the extent that you could speak to it,
Mhm.
and maybe some of the solidarity or support stuff that's out there for Natalie, that you would want to share with our audience, and and then thinking, of course, of clearly she also understands the principles that we've talked about earlier, that these are important things to not just let go of, to not
Yeah.
just say, well, no, I'm not just going to backtrack on everything I said just because I'm in hot water right now with the
Mhm.
administration.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting position that, like, I know she finds herself in, like, personally, because, you know, her livelihood is on the line. But then also the way that kind of like maps onto the organization as a whole. Yeah, it's like I know that when we first got the word, kind of like the day of, when we first got the word that she was going to be put on leave, and it was very up in the air about what was happening next. Everybody was kind of like, and this is like, you know, a day or two after the speech itself, so it's been a couple of weeks now. Everybody was kind of certain that, okay, you know, she's being put on leave, and that means the axe is falling. You know, we're a day or two from the axe falling on her being fired. And so there was a lot of kind of, you know, internal discussion, reaching out to comrades. I know that you had just had a conversation with some comrades from Samidoun, Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, and kind of reached out to some people there who we know, kind of, you know, getting a sense of, like, you know, obviously they deal with this kind of thing fairly regularly, taking the temperature, seeing where we're at, seeing, you know, like legally where, you know, like what Langara's case might be if they did try to proceed. And the first instinct was to, amongst other things, reach out to academic contacts, with a you know, letter that was more geared in that direction. You know, free speech, political speech, all that good stuff that that tenured academics love, and get, you know, but, you know, and that kind of, we did that, but there was a real kind of like resetting. Okay, we've had a second to breathe. What are we doing politically in this situation? Because it's not the situation we want to be in. It's not necessarily the terrain we want to be fighting on, but it's kind of what we've been given. And so how do we, you know, keep working class politics in command in this situation? And that kind of was a, you know, a really important and healthy way to kind of reframe the conversation we were having internally around, okay, we can defend Natalie, we can defend, you know, political speech in support of Palestinian resistance, and we can do it in the most, you know, principled way that we know how, that is going to build alliances with other organizations and people around, you know, Vancouver and elsewhere, behind, you know, a firm anti-imperialist position. And so in doing that, I think, oh yeah.
So just 1 second. I did put this in the chat. I'm going to put it in the show description as well, because I think I can make it more of a clickable link in there. But this is actually the petition. I did check with Natalie, and she is good with us sharing it. Folks should check it out. It's very well written out, and especially for folks who are in organizations. You know, the folks, it looks like a lot of the people who have signed on to it in support are other organizations, and I think that's a really, you know, powerful thing if folks want to share it with their organization, share what's going on, and, you know, connect that way. But yeah, go ahead, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, we definitely, like, individually as an organization, we'd love to have any and all who want to sign on to the statement do so. But yeah, so like I was saying, like, you know, this isn't necessarily what we, you know, the fight we want to be having, but it's the fight we have to have. And because, you know, when they're attacking someone like Natalie, they're not just attacking Natalie, obviously. They're attacking the movement. They're attacking anybody who might be in the movement in the future, who they're attacking like the very possibility of even thinking that Palestinian resistance is something that we can not only accept as inevitable, but like stand firmly in solidarity behind. And so, you know, like there's a political principle at stake, but then there's also a, you know, there's a strategic question as well. It's like, we have to fight back to the best of our ability. And because if we don't, it's going to be that much easier for them to grind people down next time. And, you know, I'm sure all of your listeners are more than aware of numerous instances in the US or maybe elsewhere. I mentioned Samadoun earlier. The entire organization has been banned in Germany now, which is like, you know, an astonishing kind of step in like a very disturbing, almost fascist direction, honestly. And also I wanted to highlight as well, like the majority of the people that we've seen, like, you know, in the news or, you know, through social media networks or whatever, who have been fired or faced discipline at work for being pro-Palestinian, have been like professionals, middle-class people, a lot of academics, obviously. But, you know, these are just the people that we're seeing. There's one instance I wanted to highlight that came across my radar recently. Some workers at a Moxie's chain restaurant. I don't know if you have Moxie's in the States.
We don't, but
it's not okay. Very good. Doesn't matter. A number of workers at this restaurant in downtown Toronto applauded as a pro-Palestine march went past, and they were all fired. And so, you know, it's the middle class professionals that we see, because, you know, and there's a reason that, you know, reactionaries are going after them. You know, universities, colleges, they're soft targets. There's a real kind of American style culture war nonsense that goes with it. But how many more, for every one of those, how many more working class people, you know, real proletarians are, you know, being fired like this because they're not unionized, or just because, you know, their boss is, you know, a Zionist prick or something, right? And so, like, really kind of highlighting that this is everywhere. And, you know, if we're going to uphold these principles, we need to uphold them for, you know, for all. And we need to uphold them for the people who are, you know, if we're Marxists, we think this is the basis of social transformation, is the working class being able to fight to overthrow the ruling class, overthrow the bourgeoisie. And so even in, you know, our battles that have been picked for us, I think we need to fight those battles, but we always need to reframe to what is the working class, the revolutionary working class position, and how do we highlight revolutionary working class demands, and how do we connect those to the demands of the Palestinian people, you know, and all colonized people who are fighting against, you know, deprivation, against apartheid, against genocide. Like, how do we bring all these threads together? And I think that is kind of, that returns us to the basis of, of our politics and of our principle.
Yeah, right on. I agree. And I think that it's always really important, and we've talked about this a few times recently on this show, but to just keep in mind that whatever we are facing here in terms of repression, it's just have to think for a few minutes about what's going on in Gaza and
Yeah.
realize that that there's at the very least an extreme differential in the level of risk and the level of violence that we are subjected to here. And that doesn't mean that people should just go do anything without much thought or
Of course.
strategy or organizing, of course. But it does mean that we do have to, if we really want to make solidarity real, like, we do have to figure out ways to continue to navigate the repression that we know is going
Yeah.
to come. And I think that I appreciate, well, like I said earlier, one of the reasons that, I thought it would be good to have this discussion is because, Natalie has been, remained consistent that she feels like, I mean, people can feel whatever they feel about some of the choice of words or whatever, but
Right.
like the principles that she is leaning towards are important principles. And I think that the real question people have to think about with regard to solidarity is, you know, um, that solidarity is not just about having solidarity towards people who are being slaughtered. And
Yeah.
we do, of course, have and need to do whatever we can to stop that slaughter. That's a part of it. But it is also to understand that the thing that is being used as the justification of the slaughter is also not justified, right?
Of
That
course.
it is that the Palestinian people have a right to resist being stuck in a concentration camp with 2.2 million in a 200-kilometer area. And so I think that it's important to maintain those principles too as we think about these things. And I think your point too about, I do think we see definitely more of the repression of middle class folks in the United States context. Actually, we see a lot of it with students. A lot of the folks that get highlighted are students, and some of them actually are fairly marginal folks, really.
For sure.
And it does also, it's scary to them because it can mess up their, you're in college in theory. I don't mean to spoiler alert this for people in college, but it doesn't help you as much as you think. But you're in college in theory to help you, be able to have a career that you want and be able to pursue something. And stuff like this can derail
Yeah.
some of those opportunities. Although I think what's interesting in the US context is that we're seeing so many people come together around. There's such a shift of folks, especially once you get to folks under 40, under 45, et cetera, in the US, that, you know, you're going to probably be able to find employers that are not staunchly Zionist
Yeah.
in the coming years, and so I don't think that people should think that ending up on Canary Mission or whatever else it is in the US context, um, is gonna be something that's gonna ruin your life. It's
Mm.
it's a lot of harassment, and intimidation, but anyway, I think that's important to uphold too. But I do think that it's important folks to, sign on to the petition, especially if you have an organization, but even if you're an individual, like, share with folks what's going on. There is repression going on all over. So I think the degree that we can build broader campaigns and efforts to combat and fight back against repression, I think that that's going to be helpful. Um, there is a question from the audience, so I'm going to pull this one up. So Joshua asks, any tips on how to talk about Palestine from a principle perspective, during the evil colonial holiday in the States without getting excommunicated from one's family? Well, I mean, yeah, well, I guess I don't, it depends on your family, I guess,
Yeah.
to some degree. But, you know, I mean, I know there's certain members of my family where it would provoke a pretty ridiculous argument, and there's certain members of my family where it would be totally fine
Yeah.
to have this discussion. But I think that the the reality is that, yeah, we need to. I guess the thing that I would lean on here in terms of principle is understanding that, the settlers in the United States did not have some right to commit genocide in the US,
Mhm.
nor did they have a right to do so in Canada, and that the remaining colonized people in both of our contexts still have rights to, land. They have rights to return to their lands.
Yeah.
They have rights to, to live decent lives and to be able to self-determine that future. And I think that, um, those are actually fairly, as you said earlier, like those are fairly simple principles that exist even within something as kind of liberal imperialist as the United Nations.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they were there because in part because at the time that the United Nations was forming, um, it was basically impossible to create a meaningful counter argument to that. I mean, the reality is that the height of the anti-colonial movement, that you just had so many nations that were coming out of colonization at this time,
Yeah.
that you know it wasn't really possible to tell all of them, no, you just have to wait until we decide that it's you know beneficial for us as a colonizing entity to grant you your rights or your freedoms or your liberation or whatever, which of course never happens. It's always a, as Fanon reminds us, it's always a violent process. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to give people family advice, but I think more important than family is finding other people wherever you are, that you can study with, that you can organize with.
Yeah.
Your cat is awesome. This cat
Oh,
is
yeah. Well, my cats love the morning. That's their crazy time. But yeah, no. Like you said, I think that finding other people, finding organizations, that's so key. I can't speak for Natalie herself, but I think we've been in a very different situation if she had given this speech unaffiliated with an organization than the situation we're in now. It's a terrible situation, but we've been able to use it to like proudly and publicly put forward a strong proletarian internationalist perspective that we wouldn't have otherwise, and we've been able to organize with people in the greater Vancouver kind of community that we wouldn't have otherwise. We've been able to build connections with organizations that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so having the collective power of an organization that has thought deeply about political strategy and about ideology and program, it makes all the difference. And so if there's anything else people get from this, I think that is kind of the secondary piece. It's like you can't do it alone. None of us can do it alone. We need to build those institutions and those strategies and those organizations that are going to help us leverage our power to be a threat to the ruling class, to be able to actually, because we can't be in solidarity with Palestine just with our words. We have to do it with our actions and our deeds. And like my comrade said in the second half of the speech, the best way we can do that is by fighting back and defeating the imperialists at home. Tall order, but
Yeah.
that's what it comes
Right.
down to.
We've got a world to win, right? So this is a question I'm gonna pull up. There's a couple. It went over the limit for the
Mhm.
comment, so there's a couple slides, but I'll just ask that question: how do you organize to deal with the intimidation of people supporting the Palestinian movement, and how many, how are you working coalitionally? How are you building a coalition to connect the movement and give people strength? And just added, like, thinking about the fast food
Mhm.
workers. So, like, just thinking about, I guess, maybe talk a little bit about how you organize locally, and obviously a lot of organizations have signed on to this petition for
Sure.
Natalie. Are you able to connect up these things?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to pretend that United in Struggle is like one of the leading organizations of like Palestinian solidarity in our area. Like, we're our primary work is around like local organizing. Like our biggest initiative right now is facilitating a worker assembly. But that has to draw in these principles of like Palestinian solidarity, because that is part of like having a revolutionary working class politics. But I will say that depending where you are, I think those coalitions do exist. Certainly if you're in a large city, or even I would assume a medium-sized city, there are Palestine solidarity organizations that are already doing that work, that have already, built those formal and informal coalitional links. You look at the poster for the call out to any Palestine event, like, mass rally or what have you, you're likely to see more than a few logos at the bottom of that poster, because people are doing that work. So connecting with the like particularly the Palestine solidarity organizations in your area, I think is real key. And but in terms of like protecting people who are getting involved, and the example of fast food workers, I think that worker organizing is as much a part of that as anything. Being able to speak to working class demands, being able to build up organizations of the working class that can like either intervene in the local like official labor movement, or in the absence of an existing proper labor movement, kind of stand in for it, at least in the interim. That is a big part of what is going to protect working class people who want to be able to express their solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. Like, maybe somebody, maybe the boss is trying to, fire somebody or force somebody out because they went to a Palestine rally. But if you've organized in your workplace, and you have people on side who are going to look out for each other and provide solidarity for one another, you can fight back against that. You can do work slowdowns. You can do walkouts. And it's not to say that those are easy levels to attain in a workplace. That requires a lot of organizing and a lot of trust amongst workers. But if we don't start somewhere, we're never going to get to that level. And so even though we're in kind of like a crisis moment, it's inevitable the crisis moment is going to pass. And we shouldn't let this very stark reminder of what the stakes are kind of disappear without using that as like a stepping stone. Okay, we've got these flashing lights. They've told us what the stakes are. What are we going to do today, tomorrow, and the next day to start building up so that next time the crisis moment happens, we are ready and we can protect ourselves?
Yeah, right on. There's one more question. We'll do one more and then we'll let you go. I appreciate all your time today,
No
Zach.
problem. Thanks.
So, so this was the question. Has taking a strong stand on Palestine conflict caused conflict within your more labor-oriented initiatives? It's my impression that anti-imperialist struggle tends to be illegible for purely labor struggles. I think I'll say a couple things about this first, and then you can
Mhm.
share any reflections you have from your. I mean, one is like, I mean, there's so one of the things I would say is like we did a good episode with Josh Mafua and Paul last year or
Mhm.
early in this year about economism, and in that discussion he kind of goes into some of the history of you know like what's called the historic compromise. In a lot of settings in the United States we have the New Deal and so
Yeah.
on, and so there's definitely a strong history of um, you know European and US and Canadian labor, kind of just prioritizing their own economic demands over other things. And there are also um, different histories than this. If you look at certain unions, sometimes longshoremen or IWW or whatever, these are not the dominant strains of unionism that we see. I mean, there've been some. I think it was Belgian union that was refusing to load weapons. Like there are certain things going on, and so I think one is important to remember that workplace organizing is still has like a lot of potential for anti-imperialist solidarity, and of course yes, you will have to combat like nationalism and chauvinism and things like that,
Mhm.
and that is like part of the work that has to be done, and I think in JMP's description of it, he thinks a lot of that is part of the reason why you have to have a revolutionary organization rather than just thinking that you can do all of that work within the union context.
Yeah.
Um, but there's debates, there's people who take different, thinking around those different topics. But that, I think that's a good discussion if folks want to check that out. But I will pull this up too real quickly, just in the US context, to give one example of something that's been going on here, is that like Starbucks workers actually posted a like a solidarity message. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was uh a social media post that was branded as pro-Palestinian, and they've actually been sued by Starbucks saying you damaged our reputation just by expressing solidarity with Palestinians,
Good for
right?
them. Good for
And
them.
right. And so I just wanted to share that because I think this is also like, there are there's a lot of struggles within labor, and some of them are generational struggles.
Mhm.
Like like Starbucks union is a lot of younger folks. It's a lot of folks who have recently unionized, and um so I think that like there's a lot of possibility with worker power that
Right.
that is important to be aware of and to think about how you can leverage, and different contexts are harder to organize than others, but
Mhm.
nothing is impossible. So anyways, go ahead, say what you wanted to say about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really helpful. And you bringing up the JMP's point about like having a revolutionary organization outside the formal labor movement, I would definitely agree with. And for our worker assembly, for instance, we've kind of like, slowly developed to a point of having kind of core guiding principles for our the organizational political line in the assembly. And those are build powerful working class democracy, organize and unite workers across all industries, develop working class political consciousness, and unify the economic struggles of workers in the labor movement with a revolutionary political vision. And I think that's really like kind of a key idea, is, like, we can't be afraid of the labor movement because it's compromised. Of course it's compromised. But that is, where are existing working class institutions, however degraded, they're unions, they're labor unions, 99% of the time. That's what we're dealing with. And that's where, workers are. And that, for a lot of workers, if they're ever going to be politicized, that's where they're politicized. And so I think, organizationally, being able to, bring a revolutionary perspective to the labor movement, and, bring a political struggle to what's essentially an economic struggle, and doing the work of trying to fuse those, so that, we're inside the labor movement and outside. We can intervene, we can throw weight around, but we're not tied down by the formal kind of strictures that come out of something like the historic compromise. I think that's so key. And the economism problem, I think, it's always there. It's always going to be a potential pitfall. And it's really just about kind of, navigating each problem as it comes along, and trying to answer each question by foregrounding, okay, if we have a revolutionary working class politics and those are guiding principles, what does that mean for how we're going to approach this question or that question? And it's so every time there's always a return to kind of like square one. And also, every time we've gone through a sequence of struggle or whatever, doing an assessment of how did we make the right decisions at each step along the way, and really kind of drawing lessons, because we're gonna screw up a lot. That's just the inevitable state of things. We're trying to build revolutionary power in an imperialist country. No one's done that before. We have lessons of the past to draw upon about what might work and what might not work, but we're also in a new situation. So
right on.
Yeah, it's just about learning.
I think one of the most interesting examples I've been thinking about in that, which might be an example for people to study and to think about, is actually, and I'm not suggesting this example as though it's like with any example, it's just something to study in terms of its own context and its own contradictions, and not to suggest that we can map it neatly upon our current situation. But actually, the one counter that I might say about what you just said, and I would agree, it's still not a full working class revolution, but the Portugal and Portuguese colonization struggle, anti-colonial struggles, is very interesting this way, because you actually have a situation where the revolutions in the anti-colonial struggles in Guinea-Bissau, in Mozambique, in Angola, that the Portuguese military is used in these to repress, to try different tactics of counterinsurgency, including different forms of inclusion. And they not only are they not able to maintain what they're doing within the anti-colonial context, but they learn enough from the revolutionaries that they're fighting against that they actually go back home and stage a revolution
Yes.
against fascism in their own country. And so I think that that's, if there's something to think about in terms of, I guess, some of the contradictions that are possible, at least in terms of thinking about something like, Palestine, or thinking about other imperialist wars that our countries are engaged in. Now, the tricky part about that, and the part that nobody wants to really hear, and we can't go into it all right now because it would be a whole other conversation, is, do we see factions of our military politicizing in such a way
Mhm.
that because that's part of it, is it's actually the Portuguese military that ends
Of
up,
course.
leading the coup in Portugal. And I don't think that it would I don't think, unfortunately, we have anything. I don't want to say too much because I don't know what I can say on YouTube and what I can't. But but the point being that, these contradictions of an empire, which I think one thing we should say in all of this is that, and to bring back to some of the points that Natalie made, is that, the resistance in Palestine is still going. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that we're sometimes lose in the media cycle right now, because the media cycle is either focused on primarily on promoting how they think that Israel is still doing the right thing despite everything. And secondarily, it's looking at a little bit of, you know, the horrors that Palestinians are living under. But basically, they're no longer even discussing or reporting that the Palestinian resistance and factions of
Mhm.
the Axis resistance are still engaging in military operations on a
Yeah,
daily basis. And, um, you know, I don't I have no idea how that will all unfold, but I think it's important for us here to remember that there's still fighting going on there, and that we need to, align our struggles to continue to fight as well, in whatever that means in our own context.
absolutely.
So yeah, well, much appreciated. Thank you very much, Zach. I'm sorry. Shout out to Natalie. I'm sorry that we weren't able to link it up to have her on. Possibly we can do it, down the line at some point.
Yeah, that would be
And
great.
appreciate the organizing that you all are doing. Folks, make sure to check out the petition. I did put it into the show description, so after this is over, if you just click refresh on
Mhm.
the feed, you should see it. And yeah, thanks again.
Really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, same. All right, appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one. Solid.